characters in the book as well. There's the government labor prosecutor who grew up in the shadow of the University of South Carolina, knowing he could not attend because he was black. That kind of injustice changes people. There's the union campaign mastermind, fed on the fever of anti-war activism in the 60s, fueled by adrenaline on the picket line as a young, striking school bus driver. There's a former Black Panther public relations director, smooth talking and able to sell a good story to the press. And there's the head union organizer who went from Desert Storm to hog driving in the plant, to testifying before Congress, back to hog driving, then to become president of the USCW, and then his story unravels from there, but he's quite a character. So what happens when a bunch of extraordinary individuals commit themselves to the same cause? They get whipped around by powerful forces outside their control, like NAFTA, unprecedented immigration and ICE crackdowns, and the election of the first African-American president. But this confluence of individual will with powerful national and international forces fascinates me. But while the labor movement is full of martyrs and strong leaders, the thing we must not forget is the power of collective action. This one union could simply not have, this union win could not have happened without the larger community of Latino, white, and African-American activists and religious groups who fanned out across the Southeast to galvanize consumer support through protests, rallies, and boycotts. So perhaps while this is not really a success story, it is a story of hope. It demonstrates the impact people can have if they join forces and speak out. So what will happen next? During the last Gilded Age, it took violent strikes and violent responses from the government before the government would acknowledge that the playing field was not level and that corporations had unfair advantage over vulnerable workers. The longtime head of the National Labor Relations Board told me she was surprised that with the long stagnation of wages in the face of unprecedented gains of the most wealthy, that there were not more strikes, that there was not more violence, that the strikes that have happened have been limited and peaceful. She expects an uprising. It's happened before. Labor law is broken, so even a success story like this is riddled with failure, pain, and suffering of workers. And this pain was not shared by Smithfield Foods, who was responsible for this suffering. Whether there will be worker uprisings like there were in the early 20th century remains to be seen, but some writers are already warning of the days of peasants with pitchforks. This book is a testament to the triumph of those who believe in speaking the truth over those who wish to conceal it for personal gain. These stories must be told. This story, for whatever reason, became mine to tell, and now, for just $20, a $5 discount, this story can be yours. Yeah. Thank you for coming. Questions and answers. Question and answer. Yes, sir.
I find the backdrop for your story extraordinary because, you know, I have relatives from North Carolina, and also we saw a lot of the protest activity attached to the Moral Mondays with Reverend Barber,
absolutely,
who's president of the NAACP. Yep. Mm-hmm. One of the things that Reverend Barber speaks eloquently about is that what we're seeing in America is a second Reconstruction. It was the third Reconstruction, the first being at the turn of the Civil War with the actual period of Reconstruction, the second being the Civil Rights Movement, and the third being what we're experiencing now in the post-Trump era. So I noticed
soon to be post.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say post-Trump. Post-Trump election, right? So I guess my question is that since you were at ground zero with this union organizing victory, what are your thoughts as far as the confluence of working class whites forming alliances with people of color to obtain these gains? And because a lot of times, a lot of the rhetoric that we're seeing directed towards working class whites is that it's more victim blaming of communities of color as the authors of their strife versus forging these alliances with these communities to lift themselves up. So I just wanted to get your thoughts from that point of view.
Yes, that's an excellent question, because that's exactly what happened in this case, because Smithfield Foods was successful in alienating Latinos from African Americans. And there are always going to be, when people look different and they speak differently and you can't speak their languages, there are already natural divisions that have to be bridged. But then when you're manipulated into believing that the Latinos are coming to take your jobs, and then indeed they did. They did. They fired black workers, black union supporters, and hired undocumented workers and Latinos who were more vulnerable to their manipulation. So it was only when the groups joined forces, and there's the Roman Catholic Church in North Carolina, the Catholic Church in North Carolina became very powerful advocates for the workers, along with the NAACP, and of course the entire network of black churches in North Carolina, and Reverend Barber and Nelson, oh my gosh, Nelson, I'll think of his name in a minute, and Jesse Jackson, of course, all galvanized and turned into a boycott. But it was really not until ICE cracked down and about 2,000 Latino workers fled Tar Heel and their families. So this was incredibly disruptive. We just watched this happen a few weeks ago in Tennessee. And then that forces the plants. And in Swift, when they did the ICE raids at Swift was then forced to raise wages, because African Americans will not do this work for less than a certain wage. So they have to raise wages so that African Americans will take the jobs that they had given to Latinos who have fled ICE. So only when African Americans then became the majority in the plant again was the union able to eke out a win. But the issue remains that if we allow, which is what has happened in the last election cycle, where white workers, the union had always been able to deliver the white working vote, the union vote, until 2016, and they couldn't deliver that vote, and this sent shockwaves throughout the union community. There's now this divide. So we have to find a way to bridge and come together for a collective voice. Otherwise, and we've got to fix the undocumented worker issue as well, because that skews the whole labor force. So.